Chapter 10 of Some Problems of Philosophy, A Beginning of an Introduction to Philosophy, by William James. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Novelty and the Infinite, the Conceptual View. The problem is as to which is the more rational supposition, that of continuous or that of discontinuous additions to whatever amount or kind of reality already exists. On the discontinuity theory, time, change, etc. would grow by finite buds or drops, either nothing coming at all or certain units of amount bursting into being at a stroke. Every feature of the universe would on this view have a finite numerical constitution. Just as atoms, not half or quarter atoms, are the minimum of matter that can be, and every finite amount of matter contains a finite number of atoms, so any amounts of time, space, change, etc., which we might assume would be composed of a finite number of minimal amounts of time, space, and change. Such a discrete composition is what actually obtains in our perceptual experience. We either perceive nothing or something already there in sensible amount. This fact is what in psychology is known as the law of the threshold. Either your experience is of no content, of no change, or it is of a perceptible amount of content or change. Your acquaintance with reality grows literally by buds or drops of perception. Intellectually, and on reflection, you can divide these into components, but as immediately given, they come totally or not at all. If, however, we take time and space as concepts, not as perceptual data, we don't well see how they can have this atomistic constitution. For if the drops or atoms are themselves without duration or extension, it is inconceivable that by adding any number of them together times or spaces should accrue. If, on the other hand, they are minute durations or extensions, it is impossible to treat them as real minima. Each temporal drop must have a later and an earlier half, each spatial unit a right and a left half. And these halves must themselves have halves, and so on ad infinitum. So that with the notion that the constitution of things is continuous and not discrete, that of a divisibility ad infinitum is inseparably bound up. This infinite divisibility of some facts, coupled with the infinite expansibility of others, space, time, and number, has given rise to one of the most obstinate of philosophy's dialectic problems. Let me take up, in as simple a way as I am able to, the problem of the infinite. There is a pseudo-problem, how can the finite know the infinite, which has troubled some English heads. But one might as well make a problem of how can the fat know the lean. When we come to treat of knowledge, such problems will vanish. The real problem of the infinite began with the famous arguments against motion of Zeno the Eleatic. The school of Pythagoras was pluralistic. Things are numbers, the master had said, meaning apparently that reality was made of points which one might number. Zeno's arguments were meant to show, not that motion could not really take place, but that it could not truly be conceived as taking place by the successive occupancy of points. If a flying arrow occupies at each point of time a determinate point of space, its motion becomes nothing but a sum of rests, for it exists not out of any point, and in the point it doesn't move. Motion cannot truly occur as thus discretely constituted. Still better known than the arrow is the Achilles paradox. Suppose Achilles to race with a tortoise, and to move twice as fast as his rival, to whom he gives an inch of head start. By the time he has completed that inch, or in other words advanced to the tortoise's starting point, the tortoise is half an inch ahead of him. While Achilles is traversing that half inch, the tortoise is traversing a quarter of an inch, etc., so that the successive points occupied by the runner simultaneously form a convergent series of distances from the starting point of Achilles. Measured in inches, these distances would run as follows: 1 plus 1/2 plus 1/4 plus 1/8 plus 1/16 plus 1 over n to 1 over infinity. Zeno now assumes that space must be infinitely divisible. But if so, then the number of points to be occupied cannot all be enumerated in succession, for the series begun above is interminable. Each time that Achilles gets to the tortoise's last point, it is but to find that the tortoise has already moved to a further point. And although the interval between the points quickly grows infinitesimal, it is mathematically impossible that the two racers should reach any one point at the same moment. If Achilles could overtake the tortoise, it would be at the end of 2 inches, and if his speed were 2 inches a second, it would be at the end of the first second. Footnote: this shows how shallow is that common exposure of Zeno's sophism, which charges it with trying to prove that to overtake the tortoise, Achilles would require an infinitely long time. End footnote. But the argument shows that he simply cannot overtake the animal. To do so would oblige him to exhaust, by traversing one by one the whole of them, a series of points which the law of their formation obliges to come never to an end. Zeno's various arguments were meant to establish the Eleatic doctrine of real being, which was monistic. The minima sensibilia, of which space, time, motion, and change consist, for our perceptions, are not real beings, for they subdivide themselves ad infinitum. The nature of real being is to be entire or continuous. Our perception, being of a hopeless many, thus is false. Our own mathematicians have meanwhile constructed what they regard as an adequate continuum, composed of points or numbers. When I speak again of that I shall have occasion to return to the Achilles fallacy so called. At present I will pass without transition to the next great historic attack upon the problem of the infinite, which is the section on the antinomies in Kant's Critique of Pure Reason. Kant's views need a few points of preparation as follows. 1. That real or objective existence must be determinate existence may be regarded as an axiom in ontology. We may be dim as to just how many stars we see in the Pleiades, or doubtful whose count to believe regarding them. But seeing and belief are subjective affections, and the stars by themselves we are sure exist in definite numbers. Even the hairs of our head are numbered, we feel certain, though no man shall ever count them. Footnote: of the origin in our experience of this singularly solid postulate I will say nothing here. End footnote. Any existent reality taken in itself must therefore be countable, and to any group of such realities some definite number must be applicable. 2. Kant defines infinity as that which can never be completely measured by the successive addition of units. In other words, as that which defies complete enumeration. 3. Kant lays it down as axiomatic that if anything is given as an existent reality, the whole sum of the conditions required to account for it must similarly be given or have been given. Thus if a cubic yard of space be given, all its parts must equally be given. If a certain date in past time be real, then the previous dates must also have been real. If an effect be given, the whole series of its causes must have been given, etc., etc. But the conditions in these cases defy enumeration. The parts of space are less and less ad infinitum. Times and causes form series that are infinitely regressive for our counting, and of no such infinite series can a whole be formed. Any such series has a variable value, for the number of its terms is indefinite, whereas the conditions under consideration ought, if the whole sum of them be really given, to exist, by the principle 1 above, in fixed numerical amount. Footnote: the contradiction between the infinity in the form of the conditions and the numerical determinateness implied in the fact of them was ascribed by Kant to the antinomic form of our experience. His solution of the puzzle was by the way of idealism, and is one of the prettiest strokes in his philosophy. Since the conditions cannot exist in the shape of a totalized amount, it must be, he says, that they do not exist independently or an sich, but only as phenomena or for us. Indefiniteness of amount is not incompatible with merely phenomenal existence. Actual phenomena, whether conditioned or conditioning, are there for us only in finite amount, as given to perception at any given moment, and the infinite form of them means only that we can go on perceiving, conceiving, or imagining more and more about them, world without end. It does not mean that what we go on thus to represent shall have been there already by itself, apart from our acts of representation. Experience for idealism thus falls into two parts: a phenomenal given part, which is finite, and a conditioning infinite part, which is not given, but only possible to experience hereafter. Kant distinguishes this second part as only aufgegeben, or set to us as a task, or the first part as gegeben, or already existent. End footnote. Such was the form of the puzzle of the infinite as Kant propounded it. The reader will observe a bad ambiguity in the statement. When he speaks of the absolute totality of the synthesis of the conditions, the words suggest that a completed collection of them must exist or have existed. When we hear that the whole sum of them must be given, we interpret it to mean that they must be given in the form of a whole sum, whereas all that the logical situation requires is that no one of them should be lacking. An entirely different demand, and one that can be gratified as well in an infinitely growing as in a terminated series. The same things can always be taken either collectively or distributively, can be talked of either as all or as each, or as any. Either statement can be applied equally well to what exists in finite number, and all that is there will be covered both times. But things which appear under the form of endless series can be talked of only distributively if we wish to leave none of them out. When we say that any, each, or every one of Kant's conditions must be fulfilled, we are therefore on impeccable ground, even though the conditions should form a series as endless as that of the whole numbers, to which we are forever able to add one. But if we say that all must be fulfilled and imagine all to signify a sum harvested and gathered in, and represented by a number, we not only make a requirement utterly uncalled for by the logic of the situation, but we create puzzles and incomprehensibilities that otherwise would not exist, and that may require, to get rid of them again, hypotheses as violent as Kant's idealism. In the works of Charles Renouvier, the strongest philosopher of France during the second half of the 19th century, the problem of the infinite again played a pivotal part. Starting from the principle of the numerical determinateness of reality, the principe du nombre as he called it, and recognizing that the series of numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., leads to no final infinite number, he concluded that such realities as present beings, past events and causes, steps of change and parts of matter, must needs exist in limited amount. This made him a radical pluralist. Better, he said, admit that being gives itself to us abruptly, that there are first beginnings, absolute numbers, and definite cessations, however intellectually opaque to us they may seem to be, than try to rationalize all this arbitrariness of fact by working in explanatory conditions, which would involve in every case the self-contradiction of things being paid in and completed, although they are infinite in formal composition. With these principles Renouvier could believe in absolute novelties, unmediated beginnings, gifts, chance, freedom, and acts of faith. Fact for him overlapped. Conceptual explanation fell short. Reality must in the end be begged piecemeal, not everlastingly deduced from other reality. This, the empiricist, as distinguished from the rationalistic view, is the hypothesis set forth at the end of our last chapter. Footnote: I think that Renouvier made mistakes, and I find his whole philosophic manner and apparatus too scholastic. But he was one of the greatest of philosophic characters, and but for the decisive impression made on me in the '70s by his masterly advocacy of pluralism, I might never have got free from the monistic superstition under which I had grown up. The present volume, in short, might never have been written. This is why, feeling infinitely thankful as I do, I dedicate this text book to the great Renouvier s memory. End of chapter 10.